Recent statements attributed to former U.S. President Donald Trump have reignited tensions between the United States and Venezuela, bringing renewed attention to long-standing disputes over sanctions, sovereignty, and natural resources. According to reports, Trump announced through his social media platform, Truth Social, that he was ordering a total and complete blockade of sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela. While the announcement suggested possible interdictions and seizures, no detailed enforcement mechanism was publicly outlined, leaving uncertainty about how such a blockade would be implemented. The statement marked a sharp escalation in rhetoric toward Caracas, reaching levels not seen in several years. What made the announcement particularly controversial was the justification provided. Trump claimed that Venezuela had unlawfully taken oil, land, and other assets that, according to him, belonged to the United States. A senior White House aide reportedly echoed this position, asserting that Venezuelan oil rightfully belongs to Washington, a claim firmly rejected by the Venezuelan government. In response, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino López issued strong condemnations. They described the proposed blockade as illegal under international law and characterized it as an act of piracy rather than a legitimate law enforcement measure. Venezuelan officials argued that preventing ships from transporting oil on the high seas violates principles of free navigation and sovereignty enshrined in international agreements and the United Nations Charter. Trump's remarks also included labeling Venezuela's leadership as a foreign terrorist organization, while the U.S. administration designated a group allegedly linked to President Maduro under terrorism-related classifications. Legal analysts noted that if such designations were applied broadly, they could increase pressure on shipping companies, insurers, and intermediaries involved in Venezuelan trade. However, experts emphasized that the legal scope and enforcement mechanisms remain unclear. Venezuela categorically rejected these characterizations. Defense Minister Padrino López described the accusations as incoherent and unfounded, arguing that the real objective behind the U.S. pressure is control over Venezuela's natural resources, rather than concerns about terrorism or drug trafficking. He stated that claims suggesting Venezuela stole oil or land from the United States were baseless and served only to justify escalation. President Maduro further elaborated on this position following a conversation with United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. According to Maduro, the U.S. government asserts that Venezuela's oil, minerals, and even its land belong to the United States and should be returned. Maduro described these assertions as unprecedented and reflective of colonial-era thinking. He emphasized that Venezuela views such claims as a direct challenge to its sovereignty. For many in Latin America, this rhetoric resonates with historical experiences of foreign intervention and resource exploitation. From the colonial period to the Monroe Doctrine and later corporate and political interventions, the region has a long history of external powers asserting control over its wealth. Venezuela has framed the current dispute within this historical context, presenting it as part of a broader struggle for independence and self-determination. During an official military event in Caracas, marking the anniversary of the Integral Aerospace Defense Command, Defense Minister Padrino López delivered the armed forces' formal response. He stated that the situation is fundamentally about control of natural resources and rejected the notion that it is about combating criminal activity. According to him, accusations related to narcotics or terrorism are used as pretexts to justify pressure and potential intervention. Padrino López further stated that any attempt to impose a naval blockade and confiscate ships transporting Venezuelan oil would constitute a violation of international law. He emphasized that such actions would not only affect Venezuela, but also other nations whose vessels and economic interests could be impacted. This, he argued, raises the risk of broader international disputes. President Maduro echoed these concerns, stating that modern international relations should not resemble historical eras of piracy or privateering. He asserted that Venezuela would not accept any attempt to undermine its sovereignty or impose external control over its resources. Maduro framed the situation as an effort to force regime change, alleging that the ultimate goal is to install a government aligned with U.S. interests that would privatize national assets. Maduro emphasized that Venezuela's constitution clearly states that the nation's natural resources belong to its people. He argued that any attempt to transfer control of these resources to foreign entities would violate this constitutional principle. In his view, defending Venezuela's oil, minerals, and land is not merely a political stance, but a legal and moral obligation. The Venezuelan government has also sought to internationalize the issue. Following Maduro's conversation with Secretary General Guterres, a UN spokesperson confirmed that the Secretary General urged restraint and respect for international law. While the UN did not explicitly endorse Venezuela's interpretation, Caracas views the engagement as an important step in seeking international legal support. Legal experts note that blockades are generally considered wartime measures under international law and are subject to strict legal standards. Some U.S. lawmakers have reportedly described the idea of a blockade as an act of war, underscoring the seriousness of the situation. If implemented, such a blockade could disrupt global energy markets, given Venezuela's significant oil reserves and role in international supply chains. Venezuela has called on the international community to closely examine the situation, arguing that the issue extends beyond its borders. According to Venezuelan officials, restricting maritime trade could set a dangerous precedent that threatens global commerce and freedom of navigation. Countries that import Venezuelan oil, particularly in the Caribbean and parts of Asia, could face economic consequences. President Maduro has also appealed for regional unity, particularly with neighboring Colombia. He referenced historical efforts at Latin American integration, including the vision of Simón Bolívar, who sought a united region capable of resisting foreign domination. Maduro called on political, social, and military actors in Colombia to support regional cooperation as a means of preserving sovereignty and stability. The Venezuelan armed forces have publicly reaffirmed their loyalty to the government and their commitment to defending national sovereignty. Defense officials warned that attempts to seize Venezuelan oil would be treated as theft rather than lawful enforcement. They also argued that escalating tensions could jeopardize regional peace and global energy security. Throughout the crisis, Venezuelan leaders have consistently framed their position as a defense of international law and national independence. They argue that the principles of sovereignty, non-interference, and free navigation are essential to the global order. According to this perspective, any unilateral action that undermines these principles threatens not only Venezuela, but the broader international system. As tensions continue, the situation remains fluid. Whether the United States will attempt to enforce the proposed blockade and how other nations will respond remains uncertain. What is clear is that relations between Washington and Caracas have entered a more volatile phase, with significant implications for regional stability, international law, and global energy markets. The coming weeks are likely to determine whether the dispute escalates further or moves toward diplomatic resolution.